Welcome to the Triskele podcast.
We are three druids gathered in a virtual grove
to share our thoughts and our path with you.
Hi, welcome to episode 4 of the Triskele podcast. I am Victoria. My pronouns are she and her.
I'm Drum. My pronouns are he and him.
And I'm Amber. My pronouns are she and her.
Welcome to this latest episode of the Triskele podcast. Welcome to everyone who is joining us for the first time, and welcome back for folks who have been with us since the beginning. We're in episode 4. We are filming at a different time and a slightly different location, so you may hear different background noises than you're used to. And we are going to be talking about the nature spirits this day. And Amber is very kindly outside showing us some of the wonderful background around where she is. And so you may actually hear background noises of cars and dogs and birds and various other things. So please expect those as we move forward. We will try to minimize them as much as possible.
So yes, the birds are very, very chatty this morning. So I apologize in advance.
And they very kindly chirp. So as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about the nature spirits. Within ADF, we tend to look as the kindred, which is our sort of general term for all things that are not human. And one of those categories is the nature spirits. We each define nature spirits slightly differently, I think, although they are generally all of the things that inhabit this earth that aren't human. Is that an appropriate, really broad category? Amber's making a face like maybe there's more to it than that.
I think that it's one of those things that's really difficult to define, because to me, there's also like the Earth Mother. She is a being that lives in the earth, but isn't necessarily considered a nature spirit. So I think that nature spirits is one of those things that can be really hard to define. But I think in general, at least for me, usually I look at both the plants and animals and minerals and the things that we can see and share our space with, but also like the nymphs and the naiads and the beings that, we can't necessarily see, but have an influence on the natural world around us.
Mythological creatures. I used to call them imaginary, but I was corrected most recently on that. So I will call them mythological because they surely are not imaginary. They're mythological. They're out there.
Yeah, I tend to refer to them as embodied and not embodied. Do they have a physical body that I can see, or do they not? I think all of us acknowledge the fact that there are beings that share this space with us, that share this planet with us, that we can't see with our eyes. We can see them perhaps with our other senses, or feel them, or hear them, or sense them in different ways. And different people have different ways of interacting with them. But that whole how you tell that someone is there who you can't physically see is a different episode. So are there specific nature spirits that you folks work with?
That's an interesting question. I think that for myself, I think that everything that's living on the earth that isn't human, like you said, is a nature spirit. So I mean, I see them, and I think when they cross my path, I take notice more than, it's not like I'm at the zoo and I see these animals and I say, oh, those are nature spirits. But if they cross my path, I usually take notice of them and say, why did that happen? I also feel that there are places that feel more special than others, or imbued with some kind of a spirit, like a glade or a river or a mountain or something of that nature. And those are the kind of nature spirits that I work with as well. And then there's there's the still quiet voice in the trees, the voice of the wind and the rustle of the leaves. To me, those are palpable and tangible spirits in nature, and I can hear them and I can see them, and I can see them waving in the background at Amber's house right now. So are they just the trees and the wind? Maybe. I think they may be something more.
And you mentioned spirits of a location, so genus loci, to use the Latin terms, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we have a park just a few blocks away that used to be an old church, and you can actually still see the ruins and the original stones that this church was built on. And I'll put a picture. We'll get a picture in somewhere of that. And visiting this area, that church was the central sort of main church for this space. This space was originally inhabited by a Roman Catholic population. And so that was a huge spiritual center for them. And it still has this feel. I mean, it's not a large park, and you sit there and there is construction all around. Every building on every border has construction at this point in time. And it still feels quiet and calm, and not like you're in the middle of a city in the middle of all of that construction at all. And I think it has to do with the spirit of the park, and whether that's the collective spirit of all of the trees that are there and the plants and the different things that are growing, or if the park has its own genus loci. I'm still new here, I'm still figuring that out, but it's a really, really cool place.
I think those intuitions are important. You know, it's very palpable.
For me, learning to work with the nature spirits in the city I live in actually took me a really long time. I grew up in rural Nebraska, so my house was next to a pasture. We had an enormous yard. Nature was all around us. You know, it wasn't rare to find creatures on our front porch in the morning or whatever. And so to move into the city, where sometimes I feel like you have to look a little bit harder to make those connections and to find those beings, definitely took time. But that's why in places like this, where, you know, I've got trees behind me and you can't see them, but there's also trees in front of me. And this morning as I was setting up, you know, there's a naughty little squirrel that likes to play along the fence here. And, you know, taking the moments to connect to those beings has become something that I've had to do very intentionally, as opposed to what it was very natural for me as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, I live in a high rise, so that can be challenging. One of the first things I did was I went out and got a plant. So I have something green in the apartment. I've lived in urban areas for a good portion of my adult life, and I found that nature's there. You do have to look for it. It's not obvious. You sometimes can't step out your door. I mean, right now I step out the front door of our building and I'm walking over plywood because there's construction. Did I mention the construction? That's everywhere here. And so it's a little bit harder to find that green space. But we have birds that fly in front of my window all the time. And I'm about halfway up the building. And sometimes they're chasing each other. And on the window that is right in front of me, occasionally bugs decide to try to make baby bugs, which is an interesting experience to have it right in front of your face. Because it gets dark and then I'm still inside, and so it's lit inside, and so they come to the window. But all of these things are different ways that you can find nature within a city. It's there. And really, if you think about it, all of this stuff, this concrete, I have a lot of concrete in this building because I live where it's cold. But concrete and all of that comes from the earth, right? It may or may not have a spirit, depending on where it is, how long it's been there, how much energy it's been imbued with, etc. But it is still connected to the earth. And so recognizing that, I think, is one of the really cool things to help you sort of find that little bit of nature, that little bit of connection in the city. You know, I mean, there's plants on the street, there's little trees, lining the streets. There's parks not that far away. It's there, you just have to look a little bit.
That's a good point about the buildings. I know that, for me, I do workings with what I call my household spirits. And one could ask, what are those household spirits? And I think that in some cases, the spirits, when you build a structure like a home or an apartment building, you displace certain spirits that were on that land, and they may move upwards and inwards. And so I guess one, question could be, are those also nature spirits? I mean, they're definitely spirits that inhabit the middle realm where we live. Um, but yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think sometimes the walls have spirit, and sometimes they don't. It really is dependent upon, where you are and your experience of that.
I think some of it has to do with how much energy is put into the space, right? Like if you are living in a space and you enjoy living in a space and it's a family space, I think it's more likely to have sort of spirits inhabiting that space than if it's a transient hotel, for example, right? Like if people care about the space that they're in, then I think then there's something there to attract the spirits. If nobody cares and they don't pay attention to it and they discard it and they don't keep it up, I wouldn't want to live there. So why would the spirits? Right? Like, I mean, I realize that's completely humanizing these beings that are not human and may or may not actually think like us, but I can understand why they wouldn't want to go into places that aren't really being kept for and cared for.
Right. It could be also that the spirits of the place um, kind of expose themselves or reach out to those who are sensitive of them.
Yeah.
So you could have a transient hotel and have 1,000 people go through the room and never even notice the spirits there, and one person does. I don't know. I mean, that's just a speculation on my part.
Yeah, I've been in a lot of hotels and I have not encountered a spirit of a hotel except one. And it was this tiny little 12-room hotel that really should have been called a bed and breakfast, but wasn't quite that small. But it was right on the edge.
Right.
And but most hotels just are there. There's nothing really there because too many people go in and out.
Right. I think you're right.
One of the things that I've started doing to try to build that connection even more, I mean, I take care of my land and I feed the critters that are around and do litter pickups and that type of stuff. But this year, for the first time, I'm doing some canister gardening. I've never been successful at keeping things alive. That has never been my jam. So this year during quarantine, my kids and I planted tomato seeds, and I kind of expected it to be a one afternoon, hey, let's plant some seeds and they'll be entertained for a minute and we'll be done. And I now, last week got to harvest the first tomato off that plant, something that we grew from seed all the way to being almost as tall as I am. And so I find myself, like, I get home from work and I'm like, I feel like I need to go take care of them and build that relationship and, give them water and make sure that they're taken care of. And now I get to share the gifts that I've been giving them back with my family in the form of food. And so it's been a really interesting experience for me, especially as someone who, like I said, can't keep things alive. Children, fine, but plants, not so much. So it's been kind of fun. I have tomatoes and I have purple bell peppers. So
Excellent.
yeah, but
I
they're in
think that
canisters because I don't want to dig in my yard. That's a lot of work.
I think that's an important observation. I mean, we do build relationships with them, and there comes to be a dependency, because I know here, where it has rained less and less through the years, if I plant those seeds and I don't water them, we're going to get nothing. So there is that dependent relationship. I water in the morning and I water in the evening, and I find it beneficial. And plus, I build a relationship with those plants. I actually talk to some of those plants because I see them come up, and I continue to care for them long after the harvest because I feel they're still alive. They're still, vibrant nature spirits. And I do the same thing as you do. We have neighborhood cats here, and I'm kind of a cat person. But they come twice a day, and they kind of come out of nowhere, and there they are. And it is ghosty. It is, hospitality that, I give them food, which I'm glad to do so, and they come. So it's kind of full cycle.
Well, and for me, it's
So
been
you,
really powerful to see that cycle occurring, to see the growth. Plants grow so quickly. Like I'm used to like trees, so they, it's really hard to tell that a tree is growing a lot of the time. So to go from this tiny seedling like popping out of the dirt to this enormous plant, and to see it, to feel like it changes every day as you approach it to give it water, is really kind of cool. To watch the tomatoes turn from green, from blossom to green to red, to actually see nature changing before your eyes has been really, really powerful for me.
It's a powerful blessing to be able to go out into your yard and pick something. And what I always do is whenever I pick something, whether it's a tomato or a basil leaf or whatever, I always say thank you for your bounty, because I do appreciate the fact that this is a gift.
yeah, I have some basil and some mint growing in pots. Currently growing inside because I'm still trying to figure out how the weather works around here. But I've made tea with the basil and mint, and that was really, really nice. So it's nice to be able to have that reciprocal relationship where I'll feed them fertilizer, and because they're in containers, I have to add fertilizer, but fertilizer and water, and then they also help keep the air clear because they eat carbon dioxide, and then I get to have little bits of mint and basil and whatever else I end up planting as we go along, which is kind of cool.
My experience with basil, I had a basil plant that I had for over 10 years. I mean, what I would do is I'd bring it outside in the winter, in the summertime, and bring it inside in the wintertime. And while it wasn't as productive during the wintertime, it was still alive. And so, we built this relationship where it would go outside and produce. And I mean, a basil plant is a great tree for, I think, for ritual purposes. And it also makes the house smell really good.
Yeah,
It's an added bonus. Mint too.
I love the way they all smell.
It's their
It's one of
gift to
my
us.
I know it's one of my favorite things to when I'm taking care of them, to just run my hands through the leaves a little bit, and then you get the smell of whether it's I used to have a sage plant, whether it was sage or basil or mint or thyme or whatever, uh, and then you would just walk around smelling. It's like my partner thinks I'm a little crazy, but that's okay.
No, you're kind of being the wind for them, because when you move your fingers through the branches, it's like the wind blowing. So especially if you're indoors, so
Mm-hmm.
you're doing them a favor.
I hadn't thought about that. There you go.
Yeah, giving them a gift.
So we've all talked about how we sort of interact with nature spirits as we see them and sort of more generally, but do you work with nature spirits in ritual at any specific time, or what does that kind of practice look like?
For myself, I picked up running. I used to run, and I picked it up again recently, and I run through the park. I run on a daily basis. And so as part of my devotional practices, I do devotional work with the spirits of nature. So as I am running through nature, I am talking to nature, to the spirits in nature. And, I really feel that it helps kind of ground me and kind of put me in context of the land that I'm running through, and kind of in an old RDNA fashion. When I hear, the wind in the trees, like in the background there with Amber, I feel that the nature spirits are talking to me. Granted, it's just the wind. The scientist says, that's the wind, son. But for me, it's more than just the wind. It is, it is the spirits of nature speaking. And I think it's palpable.
Well, and I think so when we follow the wheel of the year, when we do the different high day celebrations, while they may not necessarily be devoted to nature spirits specifically, they can be, but they may not be. We're still following that cycle of the seasons, the changes in the natural world around us. So I think in general, just by following the wheel of the year, we're showing our appreciation and our relationship with the nature spirits.
Yeah, in my morning rituals, I call upon all three kindred specifically. So I call upon the nature spirits using a stone that I have. And I do talk, I'm a bit of an animist. So I talk to all of the nature as we walk by, and a crow cries and I'll be like, hello, crow, good morning, or whatever. But I don't do anything specific beyond that. It's much more of a, we're living together in the same space than I'm making specific effort to make you sacred, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does make sense. I mentioned before earlier that when things kind of cross my path, I take notice of them. I'll give you an example. I'm not the fastest runner in the world. Yesterday I was running, and as I was running through on the trail, there was a small turtle on the path. And as I walked by, it had one paw up, and I thought, to me, that was significant. I mean, to the casual observer, it is a turtle walking across the path who just happened to lift its paw. But for me, looking at the magic in the world around us and looking at the spirits of nature, it was that turtle saying, keep going, keep on the path. Because technically it was on the path, it was moving very slowly, and I mean, I wasn't walking, but I surely wasn't at a 5-minute mile pace. And so I acknowledge those things. I think that there's, the spirits of nature for me are not coincidental. I think that nature has its own intention, and sometimes it expresses itself in front of us that we may or may not see.
Yeah, I feel like there's a whole nother episode in here about whether or not something is actually an omen. But even if it isn't actually an omen, simply taking inspiration from the natural world around you, I think really helps. Like seeing the squirrels being industrious or playing and remembering that play is a really good thing.
Well, and I think, I mean, at least for me, the importance of nature is a huge part of what drew me to paganism in general. Understanding that connecting to the world for me was more important than, finding a building that I could go into to worship. For me, nature is my church. I'm much more at home sitting out here among my trees than I am inside any building. And this is my home, and I want to appreciate it and to respect it and to keep it safe and available for future generations.
Yes. So to that, how do you do that? How do you do your part to help try to make sure that all of this nature is still here for your kids, for their kids, moving on?
I mean, part of that can be simple stuff, recycling, reusing, doing as much as you can to be, to have a smaller footprint on the world around you. Part of that is teaching my kids, hey, we don't litter. If we can, we pick up trash instead of, leaving it there. So a lot of times it's small stuff like that, and just showing them, being an example for what I can do, and letting them teach me. I mean, kids are smart. They have all sorts of cool ideas on how we can make things better.
That's a really good point. I know, just recycling. You mentioned before, Amber, doing cleanups. And those things I think are important as well. I also belong to a couple of organizations that, by contributing money to them, it's more of a passive pursuit. But I think talking to people about it, our grandson is adamant about recycling. No matter where he is, he's like, oh no, we have to protect the earth mother, and he uses that phrase. And it is, I think that's really important to do, and to see his zeal and his love for the earth and for the earth mother is really pretty inspirational. And the other thing I can say about him is that when he finds things in nature, to him, that's a gift from the earth mother. And that's an amazing, spiritual awareness and understanding, that the things that we find in nature are sacred and gifts.
Yeah, for me, it's a lot of, recycling, reusing, reducing, We have bags we take to the market and the store. They're going to be shortly completely banning plastic bags, apparently, except for the small ones that you use for produce. Well, it's a step in the right direction.
Yes.
But we have mesh bags that we use for produce. And so taking that out and using that, so we're not using the plastic, so we're not taking the other things. Some of it is also recycling when we can, right? If we are using plastics, recycle those plastics, recycle the glass, reuse it. Back in that closet that's behind the screen, that's behind me, is a box of old bottles that is stuff that I use to fill up with various, like I'll make herb blends of offerings or teas or whatever, and all of that stuff goes in there. And then also I patch my clothes, right? Like I spend the time to either make my own clothing or to patch it, repair it, to take ends of jeans. I have a cushion outside that's made out of an old pair of jeans that it had finally worn enough that patching wasn't going to do it, but there was still some decent fabric in it. And so taking all of that fabric and reusing it, you know, I think, I'm trying to remember the exact order of it. I think it's reduce, reuse, recycle. And that is actually in the order of importance, right? Use less, keep using what you have, so you're not using more, and then recycle.
Right. No, I like that. I think I love that story. Thank you, Victoria. That was great.
Cool. Well, it looks like we are about at the end of our episode. Is there anything that folks want to share before we finish? Cool. I'm going to go get my runes and be right back. Right. So interestingly, my runes are in a bag with dragonflies.
Yay. Nature spirits.
Nature spirits. The bag was actually a gift. All right. I call upon the spirit of the runes. Share your wisdom with us. What do we need to know for the coming weeks? We start with Fehu. Then Othala. And then finally with Tiwaz. So Fehu is about wealth, specifically mobile wealth, so the sharing of wealth. That idea that you become richer and more abundant by sharing what you have with others, and then everybody can pool everything together. Othala is about home and tradition. For me, it's a lot about the traditions that are passed down. So one from father to son, from teacher to student, from mentor to mentee. It's not necessarily a bloodline tradition. And Tiwaz is about success and some about justice. It's often used in spells and workings for justice. It's about that taking a risk that ends up in success. I think overall we have to look to what we know how to do, to look to the things that we've been taught, and remember to share our wealth. And I get the feeling here that that wealth is not money, but knowledge and inspiration, and to take a risk with that sharing. Maybe take a class you weren't expecting to take, or give a class, or teach someone something that you weren't planning on teaching originally, and that will bring success. So it's all about the sharing of knowledge and the sharing of wisdom and skills and trades and just information with each other to bring the success of the whole community and not just of any individual. So that is my reading for the next few weeks.
That's a great omen. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, and I think that is all we have. Although maybe I should point out, These runes were made by Drum. Thank you all very much for joining us here today. I hope that the omen is useful to you in the coming weeks, and we will see you all again in a few weeks. Bye.
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 Thank you for joining us for today's video. If you like this episode, be sure to like and subscribe. You can also find more episodes on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast providers. You can find us on social media on Facebook and Twitter, or for more information, visit our website, triskelepodcast.weebly.com.